Hey everyone, Happy New Year and welcome back to the shop. So recently I've been experimenting with a new tool that I received recently from some good friends in the Minnesota chapter of the Society of American Period Furniture Makers. If you were lucky enough to get up to the Woodworking in America conference last year in October, you may have seen or perhaps even gotten a chance to use one of this saw's siblings at the Hand Tool Olympics booth. It's a frame saw that is a copy of a saw pictured in Andre Roubo's L'Art de Menuisier. And in Andre Roubo's book, there is a plate that pictures two men using this saw to saw veneer from a log. So you might be thinking, why today would someone need a saw like this? I mean, certainly pretty much every shop is going to do any resawing or making of veneer or sawing of thick timbers with a bandsaw. So why would anyone need one of these? And you know, it's a good question. Most people probably are not going to need a saw like this. However, if you have neither the room or if, more importantly, if you don't have the budget for a bandsaw, then a saw like this may be something you might find useful. If you just do a little bit of resawing or sawing of veneer or sawing of thick timbers, you could probably just get away with using your regular coarse rip saw. But if you're going to be sawing veneers or resawing or sawing really thick timbers with any kind of frequency, or if you have a lot of veneer that you need to make, you may find a saw like this really useful because it's going to be a lot more efficient and take a lot less strokes, and it's just going to be a lot faster than using, you know, standard 5 to 6 point rip saw. Now, the saw has a blade that is approximately 4 feet long with 8 points in 3 inches. And if you do the math, that works out to about 1 2/3 teeth per inch. So it's a big blade with big teeth, and it's really designed for thick, heavy stock and really moving through material quickly. It's secured at both ends with a bracket made of 1/4 inch wall steel tubing. The blade is trapped behind the bracket with a simple steel pin made of 1/8 inch tool steel that is simply stuck through 2 holes in the blade and traps the blade inside the brackets. And at the top of one of the brackets is an iron screw that puts pressure against the outside of the end piece that applies tension to the blade. The blade itself is about 2 inches wide, and there are stretchers on either side of the end pieces with a single tenon on each end, and they're just loosely held into the end pieces and held in by the blade itself and the tensioning mechanism when the tension is applied to the blade. So it's not glued together. This whole thing can be taken apart simply by loosening the tension, removing the blade, and then everything comes apart nice and easy. Now, as I mentioned, in Roubo's book, the saw is pictured being used by 2 men. For a saw this size at 4 feet long with a 4 foot long blade, this saw measures in at probably close to almost 5 feet long when you add on the end pieces. So it can be sort of a heavy thing to wield by yourself. So it was likely designed to be used by two men, but you can use it yourself with just a little bit of practice. If you would like to design a saw similar to this that would be designed for single person use all the time, you might try shortening the blade to about 3 feet instead of 4 feet to make it a little bit more manageable. So how does one go about using a saw like this? There are a couple of tricks. I'm going to demonstrate using a piece of poplar, and I'm going to attempt to saw off a piece of veneer off that piece of poplar that's about 1/8 of an inch or so thick. We know this is possible because there are accounts, the guys at Williamsburg have said they've been able to saw thicknesses down to 1/16 of an inch or less with their veneer saw, which is very similar to this. It's a slightly different design, but same principle. So a saw like this with 2 experienced sawyers, you could saw a very thin sheet of veneer from a very wide piece of lumber from what is, in essence, a very coarse saw. So it's amazing what the saw is actually capable of in experienced hands. I'm not going to try to attempt to saw anything quite that thin, but I will give a shot at something that's about 1/8 of an inch thin. But one of the tricks is in getting the saw started, especially if you're by yourself. So one of the things you can do is just use a standard rip saw and get the cut started with your rip saw. But you wouldn't want to continue it with that rip saw because it's really going to take a while to cut through this using just that rip saw. So once you have it started, you can get your frame saw up, drop it in that kerf, and let the weight of the saw do the work. Now, you can see here that because of the saw's width, there's a real tendency for it to twist here. That is one of the downsides to these saws, and something you really need to focus on while you're cutting with one, because it makes it very easy for this saw to get offline from that twist. So you want to mainly focus on keeping that saw flat and level, and in this case I want to take as much weight off the saw as I can, because if I try and put too much downward force on, or any downward force at all, those teeth are really gonna grab, and they're just not gonna go anywhere because they're very large and very aggressive. So I'm actually sort of lifting and levering the saw against my elbows to get it started until I can really get it going. And you can see really how fast this is and how it's really throwing almost like shavings out of here. Now, one of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to tip this piece down a little bit more so that I can try and follow the line a little bit better on the side. So when we get to this part here, we get it started across the top. I want to work down the side a little ways. So I'll drop the saw back in and focus more on dropping the saw down this line. And I'm going to turn it around in the vise. And I'm going to start to come in from the other corner. Because as you start to drift, if you start to drift, it's near impossible to correct. In this case, it's staying pretty much on the line. So I want to start at this other corner now and work to meet my first cut. Now it is possible to start the cut with this saw, like I said before, but you really have to be careful and sort of, you want to really lift up on it and take that weight off. just checking there to see how I'm doing down this part of the line, and looking pretty good, so I'm just going to go at it. So I met my other cut. I'm going to drop it down in the vise. Make sure it's good and tight. And now I'm going to go ahead and meet that other side and just saw straight down this kerf. Again, you might have to take some of the weight off. So after just a few minutes of sawing, I've got a good 1/8 inch piece of veneer here. Obviously the sawn side's a little bit rough, but you know, with just a little bit of cleanup with a plane, I could easily clean this down, this 1/8 inch piece down to probably 1/10 to 1/12 of an inch in very short order. And what you saw really was just about real time. You know, I moved camera angles around and did a little bit of editing, but for the most part, it only took, I would say, maybe 5 minutes, if that, to saw through this piece. Basically just coming in from the four corners and then sawing out that middle segment, which is really what helps to keep you on that line, just by working your lines a little at a time instead of trying to go at the whole thing all in one shot. So, you know, it's a pretty efficient saw. It's a very efficient saw. It would have taken me a whole lot longer to saw this board with my regular 5-point rip saw. Now, this board wasn't that long. It's about a little over 6 inches wide. And I'd say maybe 15 inches or so. Yeah, it's about 15 inches long. So about 6 inches wide, about 15 inches long. This would have taken me a lot more than the time it took, you know, the 5 minutes or so that it took to do with the big frame saw, to do with my regular rip saw, even in this poplar. So for me, it's a big time saver. If I have to do a bunch of these, using this saw to do it is a big time saver over using my regular rip hand saw. It's a lot faster, it tracks well, and I think it does a great job. I think it's going to come in really handy for resawing boards, especially, you know, 4 5/4 into thinner stock for things like drawer sides and the like. And I've got a project coming up where I'm going to be taking some 8/4 walnut and resawing it to book match it for some case sides. I think it's going to come in, you know, it's going to be worth its weight in gold for that project. So I think it's a great saw. Again, most people are happy to do this on a bandsaw. They've got the room, they've got the budget for it. But if you don't have the budget, you don't have the space, this is a really good alternative. Or if you're just sadistic like me and you're really into the historical aspect of the craft, I mean, just want to try it out to try it out, go for it. You know, it cost about
$45, $50 or so to buy the components, buy the materials to build the components of the saw. So well worth it. My next trial is going to be sawing up this big guy here.
Thanks for watching.